What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back to discuss some Detroit Lions news before we get to the NFL draft. Today, we're going to dive into three things a little bit. Today, we're going to talk about the Lions beginning their voluntary OTAs. That's right, man. Football is back. Sort of, kind of. It's kind of back, but we're about here. The draft is about to start, so we're going to take another look at the Lions' top 30 visits. What players did we not touch on the first time around that the Lions have since had visits with? And finally, the Lions lost a draft pick in this year's draft. Yeah, it's just like it sounds. It's crazy. So let's get it started.
The city's been down, and it found a way to get up. And when you knock us down, we're going to get up. And on the way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off, all right? And we're going to stand up, and then it's going to take two more shots to knock us down. We're going to take another hunk out of you. Before long, we're going to be the last one standing.
Welcome, everybody, to a video. Glad you guys are here. We are back to discuss the Detroit Lions, man. News is going crazy right now. Rumors are going crazy. Every single day we get closer to the draft. I mean, today we hear Deebo Samuel's requesting a trade from the San Francisco 49ers. It doesn't mean that he's going to be traded. I'm hearing that the San Francisco 49ers, they want to give him an extension, but there just hasn't been those talks. Now he's requesting a trade to leave San Francisco. He doesn't like maybe the role that he's being used in. So you're like, what the heck? Now the Lions are being thrown into that kind of category as a team that could be interested in trying to make a trade for Deebo Samuel for a team in San Francisco that does not have a first-round pick. They do not pick until pick number 61. It's just, there's a lot of craziness going on. You obviously see the Baker Mayfield, all that stuff get closer to the draft. I'm sure it'll get much more crazy up until the draft starts. So the first kind of little news story or news report that I do want to touch on comes with one of the Detroit Lions draft picks that apparently now they don't have. And I guess you could say they never really had it. That was pick number 234 in this year's NFL draft. The Lions were holding what we thought 9 picks in this year's draft: 2, 32, 34, 66, 97, 177, 181, 217, and 234, which came in the 7th round. However, now it is being reported, according to The Athletic, that the Detroit Lions do not have pick number 234. And this kind of all comes into play with the trade of Trinity Benson. I think this was reported by someone from The Athletic who, talks about the Denver Broncos, but it is now being reported that the Lions actually don't have pick number 234. Now, we were made to believe the Lions had this pick. The NFL sends out memos. I actually get them through my email where they'll list, the draft order. And both times they had the Detroit Lions listed with pick number 234. Now, I guess originally when the trade went down and we acquired Trinity Benson, the thought was the Detroit Lions gave up a 7th round pick as part of that trade to bring Trinity Benson to Detroit. But then the NFL memos come out and the Lions have pick 234, and it's like, okay, maybe we actually do have that pick. So there's a lot of confusion there. I think with 7th round picks, especially when you get the comp pick, things like that, there's always a lot of, confusion. Did they meet the requirements to have this draft pick? Things like that. I think there was the one with Michael Jackson as well, the cornerback that we sent off to New England. But now it is being reported, according to The Athletic, that the Detroit Lions don't have pick number 234. So I guess you could say basically they never had it, but it was reported they did have it. So they did have it. So the Detroit Lions do not have pick number 234 from what we know now, which leaves them with 8 picks in this year's draft. Now, 234, that pick could have ended up being a UDFA anyway. Obviously, when they're a UDFA, you have a lot of competition with other teams. You can try to, negotiate some of those bonuses a little bit to try to make it a little bit more interesting for that player to want to sign with your team. So it's much more safe to have that draft pick. But we'll see how this draft goes. Lions may end up trading back. They may end up acquiring the pick. So the good thing is it's not like it's pick number 97 or something. I'd be like, what the heck happened? But no, it's pick number 234. So if you do your mock drafts, you may see that that's not on there. If you do see it still on the mock draft simulators, just act like they don't have it. And if that news changes, I will be here to report that and let you guys know that, hey, actually we do have the pick. But from what we know now, Lions don't have that pick. They are now with 8 picks in this year's draft. Look at this. They give us the draft right there. Hey, you can have the 2024 draft. We'll do it in Detroit. They're doing the celebration. All of a sudden, like, nope, now we're going to take a pick from you. That's what you get for doing this. We're going to make you think you had a pick and now you don't have it. So it's sad, but it's okay. Detroit Lions are now looking at 8 picks for this year's draft. They still have that long break between pick 97 and 177. I'm hoping we can fill in somewhere. Maybe get a 4th round pick. That way it's just not that, 80 pick. Just wait. I mean, I'm hoping that's not the case. I want to talk a little bit about this offseason program that is beginning for a lot of the NFL, different dates for every team, but we're basically back to football. I mean, we don't get to really go see anything here, but we're back. And it's kind of crazy. I feel like this offseason, at least to this point, has went extremely fast. Now, when it's after the draft, that's when things get interesting because as soon as the draft is over, now it's like a legitimate break until you actually get to start seeing the workouts and things like that. Now you're really just waiting until the season starts. But up to this point, I feel like it's flown here. Maybe you have a different perspective on that. But let's talk a little bit about these off-season workouts, which actually begin for the Detroit Lions yesterday All OTAs, by the way, are voluntary. Teams do get to have one mandatory minicamp, but OTAs for the Detroit Lions began yesterday. And this was, phase one of the voluntary OTAs for the Detroit Lions, which basically means during this time, it's not on-field work. Instead, it's like more classroom work. It's more meetings. It's more rehab for injuries. It's more strength and conditioning. That's kind of the phase that they're in right now, which is a 2-week phase, according to NFL.com. Then the second phase going through this is about a 3-week phase, and that's when you get into individual group drills. Basically, it's a walkthrough, right? It's not live action contact, but you can do some basically walkthroughs at that time. You can do like straight up offense versus defense. So, it's a little weird, but anyways, and then you move on to phase 3, and phase 3 is where things really get interesting. This is a 4-week period. You have your 10 days of OTAs. This is where you start to see 7-on-7, 9-on-7, 11-on-11. Still, it's no live contact, but you're getting guys running around a little bit on the field. So those are the kind of phases that you follow through as you work your way up to the season. There are some differences this year because in the past, recently, it's been a lot about the COVID thing, so that's been much more relaxed. These were virtual. The beginning phases were virtual last season, but that's not the case. So you saw the Detroit Lions put out that video on social media of it saying, welcome back. You got guys walking in, golf first day of school, that kind of thing. So we're back to football. We don't really get to see anything here, but we're back. And that's exciting. Dan Campbell did say that for this period, he does anticipate a good turnout. Again, it is voluntary, so you'll see across the league teams that are now starting these, or if they have been, you'll see across the league, maybe this guy's not showing up, especially see with veterans, things like that. But Dan Campbell says he anticipated a good turnout. He said just about everyone will be here. And he said really one benefit that they have going into this season is the schematic side of things. He said, last year they had to pull up some New Orleans Saints film, kind of go through that because you're working in the classroom. So you throw up the Saints, that's where he was. These are the kind of things that we're going to do. But now you can say, okay, well, this is what we did last year. And plus, I think when you look at the benefit of having your defensive coordinator back, your offensive coordinator now, Ben Johnson, who was here last year, you can pull up last year's film and be like, look, this is what we did last year. This is where you need to improve. This is how it's going to change. All of those kind of things. Now you have that actual film that you can show these players. And, we've talked about this. When you talk about the turnover, we talked about this yesterday in the stream, but when you talk about the turnover in the coaching staff, we talk about turnover a lot, specifically in terms of roster and things like that when you change regimes. But another part of the turnover is the staff. When you constantly have new offensive coordinators, new defensive coordinators coming in, that can be difficult because you're constantly having things change. Now, it's different, I think, when you have, say, for example, Aaron Glenn, who is our defensive coordinator. They eventually earn a head coaching role somewhere. I know he had some interviews, I think, with New Orleans last season. He may end up earning a head coaching role at some point down the road. Well, if that is the case, and say an all guy like Aubrey Pleasant still here steps into the defensive coordinator role, it's still basically kind of preaching the same type of message. It's still a very similar defense, same type of scheme. It's not like a completely different change. You're bringing in this guy that does his own thing, and now guys have to adjust to it. You still have that consistency. So it may not always be the same names, right? We've seen teams like the LA Rams. They have guys coming in and out of that scheme. Offensive coordinators consistently coming in and out of that scheme, going elsewhere, getting jobs elsewhere as head coaches, whatever it may be. But it's still kind of the idea of the offense with the guys under him learn to now take over that job. You're still keeping that continuity within the scheme. So that is one benefit that he did touch to. I do love the fact that the guys are back in the building. I got to believe that's exciting rather than doing it all virtually. But it is just cool to see, like, dang, we're already back to this. Like, you're already seeing videos of them going into the facility already. Teams are allowed to have one rookie minicamp post-draft. That is something to mention. So after the draft, teams can have one rookie minicamp, which makes sense. So you get some of those players that maybe you drafted, some of your UDFA signings, and you can have that one, little rookie minicamp. Also, teams get to have the one mandatory minicamp where this is where you can have veterans show up because, again, it's voluntary, so you don't have veterans coming up. But this is a mandatory minicamp that teams have an opportunity to hold. And when you have your mandatory minicamp, obviously everybody has to show up to that. And there's workout bonuses and things like that start to go into it. According to Over the Cap, and I think who was it? I think Pride of Detroit. I don't remember who posted this. Shout out to whoever posted this, but I saw it on there. The workout bonuses that the Lions currently have, according to Over the Cap, with their players on the roster. But guys that were listed in order from highest value of workout bonus to lowest was Big V, right guard, Taylor Decker, David Blau, Josh Reynolds, Khalif Raymond, Will Harris, the safety / cornerback, Evan Brown, backup center, Aleem McNeil, the defensive tackle on the inside, and of course, Ife Melifonwu. According to NFL.com, they have the dates listed for the Detroit Lions if you're trying to keep track. So like we said, yesterday was the first day for the Lions, April 19th. When it comes to OTA offseason workouts, the Detroit Lions have a couple of spans in there. You have May 24th and 26th. Then you have June 1st through June 3rd, and then June 13th through June June 16th, and that mandatory minicamp for the Detroit Lions has been listed as June 7th through 9th. And again, that's where you can get the veterans and things like that to come in because it is mandatory. Go through the draft, then you can have that mandatory rookie minicamp, and then at the end of May, things really start to pick up with OTA offseason workouts in through June, and then you start to work your way towards the season. So Lions are back in action, man. I mean, you could see the post, the pictures they posted, you could see the videos they posted. I'm just excited to have it back, and you'd love to hear that there's supposed to be a good turnout here. I mean, you just saw from the video alone, of course, their quarterback was there. It was good. You got guys like St. Brown there. I've seen Ragnow. So it's nice to see that, and Dan Campbell expected that to be the case. And I think that was the case last year as well. If I do remember correctly, I believe with all of these voluntary things, guys were showing up, and Dan Campbell expected that, and he said he talked to a lot of players said they were going to show up. So it is nice to see that, you know, guys are coming in. And like I said, right now it's not really on, it's not on field, it's more in the classroom, things like that. But anyways, we're getting closer to the season. Now I want to talk about some of these top 30 visits, because we did a video of this a little while ago, and we went through the top 30 visits up to that point that were listed for the Lions. But since that time, this has been updated, and it may continue to be updated, but since that time, it has been updated. Now, being April 20th, we are very close to the draft, just over a week away. Well, what is it, a week? Just over a week away, which is insane, depending on when you're watching this video. I mean, we are literally right there, guys. Stick with me. We're almost there. It's kind of that last stretch when teams are having guys come in for visits to talk to them, to learn as much as they can about these players, right? You already have your reports in and all of those type of things. So now it's about having opportunities to meet with these guys, to go through film with these guys, and all of those things. Just get an extra opportunity to talk to them. So the Detroit Lions top 30 visits, and again, this may continue to update. So what we have right now is much bigger than it was originally. So we're going to go through some of the players that the Detroit Lions have had in for a top 30 visit, or, you know, like a local visit since that time that we didn't touch on in the first video. If you want to know more about some of those other guys, and also guys that maybe had, you know, some connections with the Lions at the Combine, things like that, go check out the other video. We did it probably a few weeks ago. We had an opportunity to see both Kenny Pickett and Malik Willis both at the Senior Bowl this season, which was pretty cool. Malik Willis, of course, was on the Detroit Lions team, so, you know, they got an up-close kind of look at these guys. And again, it could be just a complete throw-off. It could be someone that they're actually legitimately interested in with the draft pick this year. Now, of course, the way I look at it is if you love that quarterback, and if it's one of those two guys, you're like, dude, we got to go get him, I wouldn't mess around. I would take that guy at 2, because if I believe he's that guy, I wouldn't mess around. You don't know how it's going to go. You don't know where teams are going to be moving throughout the draft. You can try to get as much insight as you can on other teams around. But the point is, man, if there's that guy at quarterback, I don't think I'd play around with it. I'd end up taking that guy at 2. However, it's one of the situations where you go with something different at 2. Maybe that's an edge. Maybe that's, you know, whatever it is. If you go with something different at 2, Lions do have pick number 32 and 34 to potentially trade up into the draft. If there was one of these guys that were slipping through that they're like, hey, we really like this guy, we have an opportunity to move up into the draft because we have pick 32, pick 34. Obviously, you have future picks. You got 2 first-round picks next year. So you could always move back to the draft. You would like to grab them, you know, in the first round. That way you have that 5th-year option. We'll just have to see how the draft board falls. I do think those guys will both hit first round. That's not to say necessarily I have them as, you know, talents above some other guys that they'll go above. When I look at a guy like Kenny Pickett, he feels like he could come in and help a team early. No, Dan Campbell said with the 2 pick he wanted, or the top pick in the draft, he wanted to get a starter with that pick, and neither of those 2 guys would technically be a starter. Again, that could be a throw off him just saying that alone. Neither of those guys would likely come in and be a starter. They would likely back up Jared Goff, especially Malik Willis. I don't see really a scenario where Malik Willis is the starting quarterback next season, at least to begin the year. I don't see that scenario. Pickett would have a better shot to do so. Have to do your due diligence on these guys, because of course, then if you traded back out of 2, let's say you traded with the Saints. I know I'm saying it's going to happen, but let's say you do it. Let's say you acquired 16 and 19, and you're sitting there and these guys are there. Well, then again, they could come into play. We'll see what the Lions do with this. I don't think they're going to end up taking either of these guys in this year's draft. I don't think they'll do it. I definitely want to just, you know, fix this team rather than trying to, you know, find and worry about a quarterback. Like, we had an elite quarterback. The chances of Malik Willis or Kenny Pickett coming in being better than Matthew Stafford was basically 0%. I don't think it's very likely that either of those guys. And again, this is my evaluation because they could have a completely different one. All I can tell you about what is I think, because I don't know what they think. Neither of these guys I think will end up being better than Matthew Stafford in the NFL. And the point is, we had that guy and we couldn't win a playoff game. I would like to focus on building the defense, building around Jared Goff. I would like to focus on those things this season. Plus, I don't really want to draft a quarterback into this situation because we haven't proven that the defense is where it needs to be. You know, it's fine on paper to be like, well, this is what we could be. But we know last year we were not good defensively. We were not. We were awful at stopping the run. we were not good defensively, and offensively, we still need weapons. The run game was better, but it still wasn't great. Still needs a lot of improvement, and it had its moments. So there's still a lot of areas I would rather address than trying to grab a quarterback with my top pick. I think that would be a bad pick for the Detroit Lions, but you do have to do your due diligence. Kenny Pickett, like I said, I think he could come in a little bit earlier and play. I think he's very conservative. I don't like the anticipation he has, especially over the middle of the field. The guy has made some wild throws, especially on the move. I know his hand size get brought up. I don't really care about that. Aside from the hand size, I think the guy does have some arm talent. Definitely not the biggest arm, but he has a lot of arm talent. He's good outside of the pocket. I do question, though, some of the anticipation reads, things like that he is a very conservative quarterback. He misses a lot of shot opportunities. And a guy like Malik Willis, we know he is just very raw with some very uncoachable traits, because the guy can absolutely fling that thing. Usually pretty nice accuracy on timing sideline routes. Really gives his wide receivers an opportunity there, but he also makes a lot of big mistakes. He's a very talented runner. He's just raw, and you're betting on the upside with Malik Willis. But let's continue through. So we talked about Hutchinson. We have Thibodeau, Trayvon Walker, Jermaine Johnson, who currently I really like Jermaine Johnson, one of my favorite players in this year's draft. Of course, Kayvon, there's those rumors and things coming out. He does have one thing that is rare, and that is that get off. And that's something that it's really hard to coach, because just instinctually he gets off the ball so fast. It's like, man, I can't help but be excited. Jermaine would help our run defense a ton. All those guys I think are definitely in play, but we already touched on them. Of course, Eric Johnson, he's on dosedn.com. All of these guys, basically everybody you see on this list is on doseofdn.com under draft profiles. So if you go to dosedn.com, you go to the draft guide, you can pretty much find a little write-up on all of these guys. Nakobe Dean we talked about. You look at that Georgia defense, just how aggressive. I think he would fit in nice with how aggressive the Lions are, especially on third down. Blitzes a ton. I think he's very reliable in terms of man coverage, especially on a running back. So that's an area you could also use him. He's a sideline-to-sideline speedy guy. And if you look at the linebackers and type of defensive backs that possibly could slide a linebacker the Lions have brought in, it's been a very common theme with that type of build for that style. Brian Asamoah, very similar. Looks like a defensive back trying to play the linebacker position, but he's still very aggressive. He sticks his nose in there. He's willing to take on linemen, even though he is clearly undersized. Look at a guy like Devin Harper out of Oklahoma State. This dude had a disgusting pro day that he put up, okay? If you take the numbers where he was either in the 4.4 or 4.5 range in his 40 time, they didn't have the official, time for that, and it can't be official, but they didn't have that posted for Oklahoma State. But he had a 40.5-inch vertical, 21 bench press reps, tons of experience. The guy's a 5-year player for Oklahoma State, and you could see pre-snap, he's a big communicator. He's the guy that's getting players lined up defensively, but that athleticism is very hard to overlook, and you especially see it when it comes to being a blitzer. I think the Lions like linebackers that can blitz. I think it's part of the reason they brought Jared Davis back. Anybody that can blitz the quarterback, I think, is someone that they're very interested in. They want downhill guys. That's what Dan Campbell told us a while ago. They want their linebackers playing downhill, and when you look at a guy like Devin Harper, he brings some of that ability. He's pretty flexible when it comes to kind of evading offensive linemen, shooting gaps. He's got a little bit of hesitation that he shows as a pass rusher. I also really like him in zone coverage. I think he's a very active in zone coverage. You see his eyes consistently moving, trying to cut off routes. He's the type of player that if you run a drag across his face, he's going to knock you completely off that route, completely throw off the timing. He's gotten really deep in zone coverage. So again, I have him listed as a will linebacker, a weak side linebacker that has some edge ability to line down, go as a pass rusher, has some man coverage ability as well. You see it in especially against running backs. So I do think there's definitely upside there as a pass coverage guy. You see the athleticism is unreal. His run defense, not always the best, but he definitely could be a downhill gap shooting type of defensive player that plays with a lot of energy. So Devin Harper, someone we haven't talked about. Derek Stingley coming out of LSU. It's the injuries. Some people think the Lions should go this direction. It was hard when watching Derek Stingley, even last year. I didn't even look at the 2019 stuff to be like, dang, this guy's not good. Like, Derek Stingley is so talented. Obviously, the injuries are the big issue with Derek Stingley, but he is such an easy move. He is so low, and I didn't know what kind of player I was getting into here, but when you talk about effort, when you talk about when Dan Campbell says, hey, when the score is out of control, when the play's not away from you, or you're running towards the football, this is the guy that makes me think of that. He's the type of guy that the ball can be 50 yards away from him, and he's trying to run it down and make a play. Derek Stingley has, of course, had the injuries, however, multiple injuries for the last couple of seasons that has caused him to miss a lot of time. Last year, I don't think he played that many games, if I remember correctly from my draft report. Again, it's on doseofdn.com, but Derek Stingley could be the number one corner in this year's draft. I could see that case being made. I think he's the type of guy you want just one-on-one. You can put him on an island and let him go to work. It's just the health thing you have to be concerned about. He also had a pretty nice pro day showing as well. for LSU. I don't think he did anything at the combine because of his injury. But anyways, Derek Stingley, someone to keep an eye on. Don't think the Lions will do it, but I definitely am on the boat of I think the Lions will end up taking a cornerback, and it could be relatively high. You know, obviously you want to take best player available. Everybody's board is different. My best player available is probably much different than what Brad Holmes or whatever those guys are thinking, or whoever, any team, or what you guys are thinking. But Derek Stingley is someone, I can't see it being at 2, but again, trade back scenario, if he slips through the draft, possibly trying to trade up. I mean, look, the value of that position, like the receiver position, is high. And to pay a top cornerback in this league is very expensive. It's just the injuries, which are super concerning because he's had to deal with a lot of them. When you look at Stingley, obviously his first year, the guy had 6 interceptions. But you just see how explosive he is off the line. You can see some upside here in press coverage. There were some, mistakes, I would say, in zone coverage where he kind of loses guys in certain schemes trying to pass off players defensively, but he's definitely a hitter, and I love the quote. I'll bring it up again. He said, "I want to be the greatest ever, like ever," at his pro day. I love that quote from Derek Stingley. Daquan McMillian out of East Carolina. He's a little bit of a smaller cornerback, 5'10", 183 is what he's listed at. I have too many notes on the guy, but statistically he does check out, I mean, incredibly. Obviously the competition's not the best, so you want to see this, but last season the guy had 5 interceptions and 16 passes defended. And he's had 12 interceptions in 3 seasons with East Carolina. So, I mean, look, this could end up being one of those undrafted players that the Detroit Lions are bringing in for a visit because, as you can see, it's not a local visit, East Carolina. So it's something to keep an eye on there, especially when it comes to the undrafted or late-round territory for the Lions. Kyle Hamilton, we all know about Kyle Hamilton. You feel like for the Lions, the top pick is likely to end up being a defensive lineman. But Kyle Hamilton is someone to keep in mind, I think, especially, again, in the trade back or possibly as he starts to slip in the draft. Really don't see him slipping too far, though. I think he will be the number 1 safety off the board, and he may be the only safety that comes off the board in round 1. We'll have to see how that happens. But Kyle Hamilton, we know, is long, 6'4", 220. A very impactful player anytime the ball is near him. He's the kind of guy that I like underneath more than anything. You get him closer to the ball, so lining up at slot is something that Notre Dame did a ton. Any way you get him an opportunity to make a play or be around the football is when he gives you problems. Now, obviously, there's still some issues in his game. There's no question. As a run defender, he can give up some big plays. His angles get a little flat, but he also does flash at the same time as well. He'll make some outstanding plays. You get the plays in an alley where he's just closing gaps. He's just a dude that you throw it in his range and you might have a problem. There's the play against Toledo where it was an interception, but he almost made it. There's another play where he's lined up at slot and they try to hit him with a quick out and he just breaks it up and he wasn't even covering the guy that the ball was thrown towards. Kyle Hamilton is a very impressive player with a lot of upside. Definitely still some issues, however, within his game, especially when you talk about how much man coverage they put him in and how it wasn't extremely clean for Notre Dame. Still not great, but he definitely has the build to match up with guys like tight ends. So I think a lot of people are interested in Kyle Hamilton. It's just how high do teams want to go for Hamilton. For a while, I thought this could definitely be the Lions' 2 pick. I don't think that's the case anymore, but I don't have him as that prospect that I would take over, some of these other guys that could potentially be available at 2. Lewis Cine is also on here out of Georgia, an attacking downhill type of safety out of Georgia. Seeing a pretty good amount of the strong safety type of builds, guys that can kind of come into the box, play against a run, take on some blockers. But versatility seems to be key here. When you look at it, guys that can play the slot position, guys that can play deep safety, guys that can come in the box, those kind of things. And yeah, obviously with Kyle Hamilton, Dax Hill, those 2 things stick out. But with multiple players on here, as you'll see as we continue to go through this list, I don't think he's the most fluid as a mover in terms of coverage, especially in man coverage. I do like him a little bit more in zone coverage, but he's a guy to keep an eye on. Again, his deep speed is not amazing, but he's a pretty vicious hitter, and he usually gets on runs pretty quickly. Then you also have Kirby Joseph out of Illinois, 6'1", 200 pounds, good size. This is a player that seems like he may be a little bit more raw, where he's not as proactive as some other safeties, especially with a lot more experience. There's a lot of safeties that I've been watching where they seem to be a little more proactive. Always the case with Kirby Joseph, but obviously you talk about his wingspan. You talk about a guy that last season had a lot of interceptions. He could slip a little bit through at the safety position. He could end up being possibly a mid-round pick, depending on what you're looking at. But when you have that many interceptions, it's very hard to be overlooked. To me, as a run defender, you see it in coverage as well. He gets completely fooled at times. His keys aren't always great. A lot of times it seems like he's just keying completely on the quarterback and really not where the play is going. So at that point, he's easily swayed out of plays, and that's in the run game, play action, all of those things above. Very low to the ground. You see plays against Virginia. I think it was Jelani Woods, where he just rips the ball out of the hands of Jelani Woods. It's that great wingspan to get back into the play and be aggressive when they're trying to tuck the ball in. So he's a guy that can make some plays on the football, and with having Deshaun Elliott now, if those 2 guys came in as starter, having Joseph come in and rotate, possibly develop there, wouldn't be a bad idea. Also have DeLauren, I think his name is DeLauren Turner Yell out of Oklahoma. Here's another, got a lot of experience, 3-year starter. The defense was completely different anytime he was on the field statistically. The defense was so much more productive. He hasn't consistently been able to find the field. He's been on and off a little bit throughout his career. I know he had a lower leg injury last season, but I really like this guy. He was a very versatile piece that they kind of used in that defense last season. He ran a 4.47 time, which is nice. He shows some quickness downhill, but I like him because, at his size, which is 5'11", 201, he looks a little bit smaller, but you see he doesn't really play that way. I mean, he finds his way into a lot of run plays. He's the type of dude that's not afraid to just put his shoulder down and try to light you up, whether you're a tight end or running back, doesn't matter. Now, I don't like, he gives up some leakage, I would say, as a defender. Doesn't miss that many tackles, which I was expecting more. I've watched 3 or 4 games of him, expecting more missed tackles. Didn't really miss many, but he does leave some leakage sometimes just because a lot of times he ends up throwing his body at guys. Attacks rushing lanes with no concern whatsoever. He's got a lot of energy. You saw him against Oregon where he was just flashing out of nowhere. Type of player that's very disciplined. I think this comes back to how much he's played, where you give him an assignment defensively, hey, this is your man, this is the part of the field you have, whatever it may be, especially against the run. All that eye candy behind the line of scrimmage doesn't seem to throw him off. So while he's not maybe the most reliable defender because he can get a little flat, he is one of these players, man, that he's fun to watch, and he's just running around. He's the type of player that I think you could put him at slot. You could use him on sub packages as your third safety. He can play a lot of different roles, I think, for you defensively. He's I guess you could say tad undersized. He's not like McKinley size, but he's a tad undersized. But at the same time, he plays with a lot of aggression. I thought, against, you got to got guys like Charlie Kohler at Iowa State, that can be some issues in man coverage. I thought in off man, they put him in slot coverage on third downs, which, again, Lions, if he goes zero coverage, then of course there is no linebacker help. You're man up, man to man. So for him, he's going to be asked to play man coverage. We saw this a lot last season. Tracy Walker, Dean Marlowe, they had to play a lot of off man coverage on third down and 9, third down and 10, those situations, and he did it pretty well from what I've seen against slot corners. I thought he had a really nice change of direction, kind of route anticipation on that first cut where he can stick with you long enough to the point where you're going to get to the quarterback. And he also had 3 interceptions last season. He's a little bit over aggressive. I talk about flattening some of his run angles. You also see RPOs, play actions can get him to bite a little bit too much, but he's a fun player to watch, man. I love the energy what the dude plays with. And then you also, of course, have Quay Walker, the linebacker out of Georgia. He could have been a pick 32, 34. I didn't have him as a higher grade than Channing Tindall, when I initially went through. I'll have to go back and watch a little bit more of Quay Walker, but I know he's long. And again, it's just that defensive scheme where these guys seem interchangeable to play a lot of different roles, but it's that defensive scheme where it's downhill, get after the quarterback, fly around sideline to sideline. Important to keep in mind when you look at the linebacker position, whether you take it early or you try to wait, that is one of those positions that could definitely fall a little bit. First off, I think it's pretty deep off the alpha ball linebacker position, but also you look at, kind of today's NFL, you're looking for a lot of those speedier sideline to sideline guys, and you're getting a lot of those players that come out. Plus, on pass downs now, we're seeing a lot of the guys that come off the field, right? You're using defensive backs. There's just a lot of versatility between it. So would it shock me if certain guys that were thinking, well, they're going to be this high, actually slips through and falls through the cracks and falls deeper into the draft? But it's also a pretty deep position. At the same time, some of these top players may fall out of the first round because teams are just waiting on guys. Maybe it gives you a little insight again on what the Lions are looking for and where they're valuing certain positions. I mean, you don't want to put too much stock into this, but if you're like, okay, where are the Lions valuing linebacker? Well, maybe a little bit higher than they're valuing maybe grabbing another interior defensive lineman. Where do they value edge? Clearly very darn high. So it's interesting. Maybe you take some from that, maybe you don't. Either way, let's take a look at some of these local visits now, because these are the guys within 50 miles from my understanding. They don't technically count against it, but dude, there's some talent here. And man, oh man, some of these dudes could be very, very interesting UDFA pickups. Connor Sampson out of Western Illinois is someone I have to continue to watch film on, but man, I'd be lying if I said he wasn't fun to watch. The first game I watched, his defense gave up like 60 points, and he nearly led like a 20-point comeback. But Connor Sampson he's pretty fun to watch, man. He's 6'3", 215 pounds. Definitely seems like he'll probably be undrafted, but I have him listed as a guy that should be drafted. My grade gives him a draftable grade for sure. Some work under center as well, where you get some of those quick play actions, forced to reset his feet. I really like his feet. I think it's pretty smooth, especially when you did some of his RPO work as well. We know a lot of colleges do that, but he had a lot of variety there in a different type of drop back scenarios that they put him in, right? There was a lot of variety, 5-step drops, 3-step drops, 7-step drops. So you're seeing a lot. Sometimes they would roll him to one side. You have to completely flip around, his feet to get himself positioned to make the pass. And he combines that with, to me, a very quick arm. We always talk about Matt Corral, guys like that. Trust me, go watch Connor Sampson if you want to see a guy that gets the ball very quickly, very quick and snappy release. And to me, this kind of player is interesting because, yeah, you bring in Pickett and you bring in Malik. These guys are, two high quarterbacks in this draft. But Connor Sampson is interesting because, to me, it gives me some insight on what quarterbacks stuck out to them. What quarterback interested them outside of, well, this guy's the top quarterback. What interested them? A guy that no one else is bringing in, things like that. And it's Connor Sampson. Smart player, gets everybody moved around, does a lot of IDing pre-snap, a lot of movements going on. He has to do a lot of different things. It's not just every play's RPO. It's a lot of movement. The anticipation. I would argue from the games that I've seen, obviously the school difference, that's important. The anticipation that he plays with is better than Kenny Pickett. I would argue that easily. As soon as he sees where he wants to go with the football and he sees how the zone is lining up and what he's seeing defensively, the ball's going there. You see the pre-snap, he sees a cornerback starting to kind of a little depth, maybe in a cover 3 look where they're starting to bail a little bit pre-snap. And as soon as he snaps it, he's going there with the football before even seeing the wide receiver come out of his hitch. It's things like that. He has some beautiful throw. The touch passes that he can throw are absolutely outstanding. Some of these sideline touch passes. Competition's questions. I didn't think of his receivers, always put in best spot. He does have a lot of interceptions. The guy had 14 last year. I think, sometimes you see him, kind of throw an anticipation throw and it just turns out it's not there. And it's like, oh yeah, you just threw that into coverage. But I do like that confidence. It's like, okay, this is what I think I'm seeing. Here's where I'm going with the football. And it leads to big plays. It also led to some interceptions. Sometimes he got stuck in the pocket a little bit. But when we talk about athleticism, where he's like, well, what is he outside the pocket? Nah, inside the pocket. Probably one of my favorite parts is the way that he moves the pocket. See him kind of shoulder dip. You'll see him slide up the pocket, feel the pressure from inside the pocket while keeping his eyes downfield. As he sees certain types of coverage where they're really playing soft, he might take off and run. Not very fast, but he's very athletic within the pocket. He's a very tall type of quarterback that I think, you get him caught in his back foot a few times for some of his passes are just not great. He doesn't really step into all of his throws. And I think that could be more of a consistent thing. He gets lined up well, but I think the follow through needs to be a little more consistent. A lot of guys have that issue. I even noted that with Malik Willis. But man, this is a dude that if he somehow, hit UDFA, which honestly after watching him, I don't think he should, rhythm, timing type of passer is where I think he fits in. I like him a lot. Connor Sampson, that guy is interesting. Bring him in if he is undrafted, where you have him come in, compete with Blau, compete with Boyle. It's one of those roles. Maybe one of those guys hits a practice squad, whatever it may be. That would be kind of cool because especially if you don't have to use a draft pick on it, or maybe if you get a 7th round pick back somehow, you can use that. You continue with Hassan Haskins, who we've talked about. I like him a lot. Running back out of Michigan, reminds me of Jamal. Kovac, running back out of Toledo. This was a very statistical player at Toledo. He's put up some great years. I think he had 1,400 yards last season with double-digit touchdowns. Had some big games against Notre Dame. He just really had one big run in that game. One of his strengths in his game is kind of finding the hole early in plays, setting up defenders, safeties. It was that big run against Notre Dame where Kyle Hamilton missed as kind of the last line of defense, so it's one of those reps. Gets some space, and it turns into a big play where he has some nice breakaway speed when you look at his sub 4.5 40 time that he put up. He's in an offense where it's follow the blocker, follow the pulling offensive line, be very patient. It's a power rushing scheme. That's the offense that he's basically in. You see him protect the football anytime he's between the tackles. More of a between the tackles type of runner in my eyes. I like him a lot on draws, those kind of things where you can set up plays early because it seems like he sees further down the field than he is, and he's very proactive to setting up big runs. Kind of a throwback running back style where you see a lot of guys, they'll pick up a big chunk of yards and then they'll kind of just walk out of bounds when there's defenders in front of him. No, not him. He's going to grab an extra 2-3 yards. He's going to put his shoulder down and ram into you on his way out of bounds. The thing is, Toledo's put out a lot of good players. Like you may think, oh, Toledo, who do they put out? They put out a lot of studs at Toledo. Obviously, Kareem Hunt, who's with the Browns now. You got guys like Lance Moore. There is some talent that Toledo puts out, so don't overlook them. And for a MAC school, they do that, and they're also pretty darn competitive. Like they literally probably should have beat Notre Dame, but they gave up a touchdown at the very end. They're competitive, and Kovac is one of their better players. His route tree was pretty darn limited. I didn't really see him do much aside from run a flat, maybe a little out route from the backfield, or get outside and run a vertical or a hitch. But he did line out wide a few times. They would put him out there, and he would come out every single third down. And to me, a reason for that was just the pass protection. He's got a lot of starting experience. You can see him surveying the field pre-snap, identifying where's the pass rush coming from, and then he's picking up on that. And you see it very useful in pass protection, very willing in pass protection, just hits guys. You'll see him support offensive linemen by giving him a little chip block out of the backfield. I think he can do a better job connecting consistently, but to me, he's a very patient runner. He moves at 2 different speeds. He moves at a certain speed when he's inside the tackle box, which you would like to see maybe a little quicker, versus when he's in the second level. He put up a really nice 40 time, and it doesn't always show that during the play, but he's a very patient runner, finds his holes, uses cutback lanes, kind of gives me some Craig Reynolds vibes there with a little bit more of that top end burst, some pretty nice contact balance as well. I wouldn't maybe say to the Craig Reynolds level. They had a nice little rotation going on there, but he was the guy in that backfield that was usually consistently putting up good numbers. Gilliard out of Saginaw Valley, I didn't Again, I couldn't really find film on the guy, so he'll have to be someone I wait on. His first 3 seasons, he didn't really have much production his past year. He had just over 200 yards. First 3 seasons, though, he had 30 touchdowns. So just throw that out there. Bigger receiver. Again, what kind of receiver are you looking at? Well, a lot of these guys are 6'2", 6'3", 6'1" at least that the Lions are bringing in for visits. It's the kind of receiver that I would bring in. Talking around 5, 6, 7, whatever it may be pick. Yeah, at that point, okay, I'm cool with a little more of a gadget player, someone like that. But early, if we're into it early, I want a guy with some size. And this is another guy with some size, even though I don't think he'll be an early pick. But I hold off because I haven't seen a ton. Dalen Baldwin out of Michigan. This is a player that transferred from Jackson State. Still didn't have any crazy statistics any time, but he was kind of buried on the depth chart for Michigan. And if you're like, why are the Lions interested? Because after watching the first game, I was like, why would we be interested in this guy? So just this is purely a top 30 visit. Well, obviously, you can talk to the guys about Hutchinson and be like, hey, how do you like Hutchinson and things like that. But also, Dalen Baldwin does bring a few things. His 40 time does not measure out well as like a 4.65, like, Cephas type of 40. Actually, a little better than Cephas. It's a good size receiver. And to me, where he sticks out in route running is what he does on comeback routes. Anything working back to the football, he is a very crisp route runner there, and he really sells it. Off the line, he is consistently aggressive, no matter the release that he's playing against, even though he could be a little bit better with his hands to keep himself free. Very aggressive off the line, really sells a vertical route, so he moves at a higher play speed than his time even shows. But then at the same time, he really is crisp at working back to the ball. And I see those comebacks, possibly corner routes that you see with Josh Reynolds, bigger receiver that can go up and get the ball out of the air, that kind of thing. You also saw with Tay Martin, and I'm like, oh, okay, I can see this. Maybe not the fastest, and I don't think we need the fastest. Why would the Lions be interested in David Bell? Same reason. Bell's not the biggest receiver, but route running, timing, and just hands are outstanding, just plucks passes. So again, you get another guy like that. Now Dalen Baldwin, to me, a little bit, his hands do concern me behind his body, kind of passes. Some of that body control didn't seem outstanding. But what you do like is that he is pretty nice when it comes to dropping the ball in the bucket. Over shoulder pass is very consistent there, and he finds a way to work himself open while being willing as a blocker. Not great, but willing as a blocker. Of course, you have a guy like Jalen Martin out of Pitt State, who was originally with Iowa State, 6'3". So again, you talk about the size. Now, here's a guy I want to talk about a little bit. Odukoya, I think that's how you say his name. I don't want to mess that up. Odukoya, the tight end out of Eastern Michigan. This dude is really interesting. Now, you want to bring in that guy that's more of a pass catcher. We always talk about that, right? You want more of that receiving option, especially if Hockenson ever went down or he was out for COVID or whatever it may be. You want more of a receiving option. And while this tight end hasn't really shown that, he had 13 receptions, his most productive receiving season last year. He wasn't utilized in that role offensively. It was not his role. He's even talked about it on an interview. That's not what he did in that offense. He wasn't that tight end. He would come off the field on some of those, pass sets unless he was pass protecting. Lions love these guys, Garrett Griffin, Brock Wright. As a blocker, oh my goodness, you can't overlook this. He's a 6'6", 63-pound tight end. 2 JUCO schools, but man, he's got some good length to him and just a lot of physicality. He said that he put up 28 bench press reps in the offseason, but he got to wear the number 2 in his first senior year. He basically had 2 senior seasons because of COVID, things like that. But he got to wear the number 2, and this is like an award at Eastern Michigan is to wear the number 2 because it's, the on and off the field excellence. They started this a few years ago calling it like deuce, and he got to wear that for Eastern Michigan. One of the quotes that I had, he said, I want my team to run behind me. I love blocking. Watch him against teams like Western Michigan where you have Fayad out there. Works the close space between defensive linemen. I really like him in the second level. He does a really nice job of moving towards second level and constantly getting connection. They use him sometimes as a lead blocker out of the pistol formation. Goes the point of attack well. It's another one of those guys that's just going to drive. And like I said, last season he had his most statistical receiving season with 13 receptions, 130 yards. He's not very explosive. It didn't seem like as a route runner, more of a balanced route runner. But he had some numbers there. So you think about last year, the kind of guys the Lions brought in at tight end, some of the guys out of Ohio State, things like that, not a lot of receiving production. He didn't play in a scheme where he was asked to be much of a receiver. And even he said, that's not maybe my strong suit, but he feels like he can do it. So that's an interesting one. Andrew Stuber out of Michigan. This is an offensive tackle. I like him as kind of a power run grader. I don't know if I really like him in a zone rushing scheme, but I love the guy going upfield, going downhill. He could also possibly play guard a little bit at the next level as well. I don't know how to say this guy's name. Obaid out of Ferris State, a 6'4", 300+ pound offensive lineman for Ferris State, who last year went 14-0. They were outstanding last season. He held it down at that left guard position. Smooth. A lot of their offensive linemen kind of went to an instant chop on some of those zone runs, but he works well to the second level. And how do you know that? Well, they used him to pull all the time. Now, sometimes he gave some tells. He would kind of line up a little bit further behind every other offensive lineman, but he was a pulling offensive guard. Again, you talk about that power gap rushing scheme. This is the type of player that would plug into that, right? Just add competition there. Probably not using a draft pick on the guy. I didn't see a lot of really pass sets, but as a run blocker, gets downhill well, usually does a nice job of trying to find some leverage, even though he's not the biggest guard. He's 6'4", which isn't a bad size, but usually does a pretty nice job of trying to find some leverage, show some upper body flexibility to try to get underneath your pads. And you see it really when they get inside, like, hey, you need a couple yards, he gets lower than everybody and he drives his guy out of the play. So it's not always consistent, but definitely a nice mover, and he's got some speed working towards the second level. Then you have Chris Hinton out of Michigan. He wins in one way consistently. He's off the ball very slow. He's usually a lot of times the last guy off the ball, which does speak a lot to that natural instinctive awareness off the snap. And it does question get off, and it makes you really question, can he play in a one-gap defense? Definitely seems like he's suited for two-gap, because what he does really well is he gets low off the snap. He wins with leverage always. He's always winning. I don't remember many reps where he didn't win the leverage battle. He gets off so low off the snap. He constantly gets hands on you early, and it suits him very well to possibly be a two-gapping interior defensive lineman. Now, for Michigan, he was a pretty movable piece. You saw him line up as a 5. You saw him rotate around. They did a lot of, movement pre-snap all the way to playing over the center. You can move him around. I think maybe a 3-tech type of spot, possibly a little bit more inside at his size. Maybe he could bulk up a little bit more, but he's got a nice, strong, sturdy base as an interior defensive lineman that constantly wins the leverage battle. You see a little bit as a pass rusher in terms of push, natural instincts when the ball goes by his head to get his hand up, which is awesome because not a lot of guys do that. Somewhat active hands where he'll, mix in some swipes, some chops, things like that as a, trying to pass rush, but there's really no moves outside of that. There's not much pass rush you're getting in the interior. Probably won't be a huge third down useful player. However, he can be somewhat useful on stunts. That's where he does kind of shine because he has nice lateral mobility. He just plays so low. And if you want a guy that's constantly going to win the leverage battle in the interior, this may be your guy. And I know that's never really exciting, just consistent. It's play in and play out, you know what you're going to get. Ability to disengage because he gets his hands on so early. Not the biggest length, but yeah, interesting, especially once you hit day 3, I think Christopher Hinton is. Jeremiah Tyler out of Princeton, who's listed at 6'1", 225 pounds. Again, he was kind of tough to find film on, so I won't go too much into that one, but you do see the build is very similar there. Then you have a guy like Ahmad Gardner. We know the cornerback out of Cincinnati, so you have Ahmad Gardner. So you just use the local visit, which is just easy because then it doesn't count. And then you also have the cornerback Derek Stingley coming in for visits. Also, you have Dax Hill, the cornerback slash safety out of Michigan. Played in a lot of different spots for Michigan. A lot of times he did line up at slot. Very willing blitzer. Extremely athletic. But he also did play some split coverage, single high looks. He was more used in the slot, but he did move around. Showed some versatility there. So he's a piece that could be moved around a lot. But we know about Dax Hill. How about guys like Brad Hawkins out of Michigan? A 5-year player, a 3-year starter. I talk about those strong safeties kind of builds that they're looking at. Brad Hawkins is that. He's more of a conservative player, I would say, in coverage, where he doesn't really bait quarterbacks. He doesn't have any interceptions in any of the years that he's played, which is concerning. But he's a fairly reliable open field tackler. Not a big hitter. Maybe you would expect some of that. Not really, but that's because he breaks down and he wraps up. Very reliable wrap-up tackler. Very smart defender as well. And you see some route recognition. Like there was one play against Penn State where they ran the same route, the double route, or arrow. I don't even know what you would call it, like this, right? 2 receivers kind of did this. And usually that first one's to clear out the zone and the second one through is where the pass is going. And you saw it against Penn State. As soon as the first one cleared the zone, he wasn't even looking at the quarterback. He immediately dove down because he knew the second one was coming right back through that same zone. Now, the pass was caught. It was thrown to Jahan Dotson. They picked up the first down. But it's things like that. You see route recognition. There was also an out route I noted where he was literally pointing where the route was going to go before it even went there just based on scheme. Doesn't always see quarterback and man, which part of the reason I don't think he has many plays on the ball. He's not extremely fluid when it comes to kind of changing directions, flipping hips, but he has had some box work where he has some length where he can kind of compete inside the box. He just feels like a guy that could come in, be a backup safety, and be someone that you could rely upon to step in. Very big communicator, got guys lined up pre-snap all the time. So someone to keep an eye on for day 3. Then you also have Scott Nelson out of Wisconsin. I don't know who this guy is before I saw this. Scott Nelson needs attention. He's a 6'2", 205-pound safety that we talk about Dax Hill. You talk about all these safeties, like, oh, they can play slot, things like that. He's another one of those guys. He is a crazy athlete. Listen to this. 4.38 40, 1.48 10-yard split. Seriously, that's insane. 6'2", 3 cone, 39.5-inch vertical, 14 bench press reps. And he plays with tons of energy. He's very excited. Anytime someone makes a play, you see him jumping around. wow. Athletically, wow. And he played a lot of different roles for that defensively. Legitimately. You can line him up at cornerback. He's even done some slot work. He's lined up one time, sometimes on the outside as a one-on-one cornerback. I've seen that as well when they need it. So he's a highly, just put him anywhere and he could help you. Kind of gives me some Jaquan Brisker vibes in that way, where he's just very smart defensively. A lot of cover 3 work defensively, which I think is something that the Lions, are going to continue to do next year. And it's a lot of the guys that they're interested in do that defensively. A lot of cover 3 work, just like Deshaun Elliott. And what I like is just he's a very opportunistic safety. He's the kind of guy that's going to give teams problems because he's going to get the occasional interception and occasional pass breakup. He gets on reads quickly using the eyes of the quarterback. Now, he does this while also keeping track of the receiver, which is not an easy trait. Marcus Williams is great at this, not putting him on Marcus Williams' level, but he does that. You look at a guy like Hawkins, I don't think he sees both consistently. This dude does, and he's very jerky with it, where it's like if he sees it, bam, I'm gone. It's just like, okay, he's very good at seeing the route, but also seeing quarterback at the same time, so he has a nice little feel of both. And as a run defender, he attacks, shoots lanes. He was a big blitzer for them, so another aggressive guy, not afraid to put his head down and take on blockers. Some inconsistency as a tackler. He can be fooled, especially as a run defender. That's a little hit and miss. Sometimes good, sometimes it's not. But I really like his coverage upside. I really do. And he's got a potential to make a lot of turnovers. So I have him graded as another draftable prospect. So yeah, I mean, he might go undrafted because I've never heard of him, but if he isn't, then we should be interested. And then you finally have Thomas out of Western Michigan. Now, Thomas is an interesting one. We have listed as safety, but he also kind of moved the linebacker in 2020 because of an injury due to Zaire Barnes on their team. And he kind of played that overhang role, 6'2", 214. He could kind of do both. I don't know where you use him. I think he'd be like a sub-package guy right now just based on what he played last year, like a outside linebacker or a strong safety. But he could probably do both. You see good speed in this game. I haven't seen the most film, so I'm going to continue to go back and watch it. But you do see some sideline-to-sideline speed. And, I think it's just good experience because he's having to work against blockers. He's having to work through blocking schemes. Tie that with the ability to play safety in the past, and his size is very flexible where it's like we could probably use him in a lot of different ways. So A.J. Thomas, yeah, he'll probably go undrafted from what I've seen, but someone to keep an eye on once it hits the UDFA side. And then they have Julian out of Eastern Michigan. He's just a punter, but he was outstanding at the MAC. He had 37 punts that went over 50 yards last year, and he had 51 punts inside the 20-yard line. So, yeah, he was outstanding as a punter statistically. I'm not going to really go into much more than that, but, I mean, we don't need a punter, but I guess why not do it? He didn't have any kicking stats, though, so he's not really a kicker. So that one's a really interesting one to me. But anyways, I kind of just want to dive into some of these guys. The reason there's a question mark is because we don't, I guess, know officially if they're local visits or if they're just top 30 visits. Maybe they're top 30 visits. Point is that you kind of get a nice little feel, maybe the type of player, linebacker, safety, physical, linebacker, sideline to sideline, downhill with speed, guys that are aggressive. Brian Asamoah plays like he's 50 pounds and he's like 210, okay? He is not afraid to put his head down and ram right into an offensive lineman. So it's that aggressive stick with the play. It's those kind of guys. And a receiver, taller receivers, and I'm 100% on board with that. I hope that's how the Lions address the receiver position. The smaller guys are cool, but I do want to get some size out there. I like that more. But anyways, let me know your thoughts in the comments below, man. I thought we'd dive into it. We'll continue to keep this updated. It's really kind of coming to a close now. If you want to check out the first video where we dive into some of these other guys, talk about some of the other guys on this list, definitely go check it out. But until then, thank you for watching, and I'm out.